to the point where a young woman in Chicago, driving to her church to donate some clothing, was shot 5 times by the ICE agents and survived it by some miracle. And then no charges were filed against her. The chiefs of police in Minneapolis...
Welcome back to Freedom Forge, where truth is forged in fire and accountability actually means something. If you believe in law, order, and leaders who put citizens first, go ahead and hit that like button and subscribe right now. Because today we're breaking down another Senate hearing that reveals just how divided and frankly confused our leadership has become on issues that directly impact American safety. In this hearing, lawmakers are questioning law enforcement officials about immigration enforcement, public safety, and the role of agencies like ICE. The discussion centers around whether current enforcement strategies are targeting dangerous criminals or creating fear in communities, and whether policies are helping or hurting public safety across the United States.
Durbin, I believe.
Sheriff Burkhead, tell me a little bit about your background since you've been declared an enemy of public safety.
Well, I grew up in rural North Carolina, Randolph County to be exact. Went to public schools there, and I started my law enforcement career in Randolph County in 1984. And then I matriculated to Durham, North Carolina, went to work for Duke University, served there for almost 17 and a half years. And 10 years after going to work at Duke University, I was hired and appointed as the chief and director of public safety for both the university and the medical center. And from there, after 7 years, then I served as the chief of police in Hillsborough, and now I am the sheriff in Durham County, elected in 2018.
Elected by the people?
Elected by the people.
What was your percentage?
This past primary election, I got 86.2% of the vote, sir.
Seems like the people who know you were prepared to vote for you.
That would be correct, sir.
Yes, and so whatever's been said at this committee meeting may not really reflect any knowledge of who you really are. I listened to the chiefs of police responding to ICE's activities that led up to the killing of 2 innocent people in Minneapolis and others. It led up to a point where a young woman in Chicago, driving to her church to donate some clothing, was shot 5 times by the ICE agents and survived it by some miracle. And then no charges were filed against her. The chiefs of police in Minneapolis and Chicago report that because of ICE activities, they've got 2 obvious problems. One, responding to reports of ICE activity, and number 2, the fact that the community, which is being beset by these ICE agents, is living in fear and doesn't reach out, as they once did, to law enforcement officials. As a former chief of police in at least several jurisdictions, does that explanation ring true to you?
It does, sir. Unfortunately, it does. Yes.
That would seem to be the dilemma we face here. As we turn up the law enforcement in communities and don't target specifically bad individuals, we run the risk of scaring and frightening ordinary families and businesses. As one person said to me, they're going after the gardeners, not the gangsters. Do you see that as a problem?
I do indeed, sir. And as I said in my opening testimony, I agree with going after the target individuals who are in this country, documented or undocumented.
So do I.
If they commit violent crime. And that's what we do in Durham County, where I'm the sheriff and proud to serve the residents of Durham County as their sheriff. Anyone who violates the law in my jurisdiction will be identified, apprehended, and presented to the DA for hopefully successful prosecution.
And 6 out of 7 of those who have been detained and some deported by the ICE operation had no criminal record of any substance. Does that surprise you?
It disappoints me. Again, I think we need to be going after those individuals who commit crimes in our cities and towns all across this country and not terrorizing communities, and certainly not going after those who are trying to make a living and who are not violating our laws.
I have some pride of authorship in this comprehensive immigration bill, which passed the Senate in a bipartisan way, supported by business and labor and every major group there was, then foundered in the U.S. House of Representatives. but it had a provision that every undocumented person in America who wants to work has to report themselves where they live to the federal government and go through a criminal background check, that every employer has to use E-Verify to make sure of the identity of the person who is in their employment. That seemed to me to be a pretty good system, changing what we live with today, but creating an opportunity for people to work legally in this country if they pass a criminal background check. Does that sound reasonable to you?
It does sound reasonable to me. And again, our immigration system has been broken for quite some time, and I think that would be a step in the right direction.
It's one of my major disappointments. I introduced the DREAM Act over 20 years ago. I still think it's basic justice, gives people brought to this country as children, toddlers, and infants, because of the decision of their parents. You have a chance to become part of that country. They get up every day in that classroom with the rest of the kids and swear allegiance to a flag, which doesn't allow them to have a chance. I think there are ways that we can make America safer and humane, and it doesn't involve ICE agents shooting American citizens on the streets of Minneapolis or Chicago. I think we can do this in a thoughtful and humane way if we temper the rhetoric and get down to basics. Thank you very much for your testimony.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Whitehouse.
Thank you. I come from Rhode Island.
Now let's get into what was actually said here, because this is where things start to get very real. You have a sheriff, an elected law enforcement official, sitting there explaining his background, decades of service, and strong support from his community. This is not some political activist. This is someone who has spent years enforcing the law, rising through the ranks, and being trusted by voters. That matters, because when someone like that speaks, it should carry weight. But then the conversation shifts, and you start hearing a narrative that should concern every American who cares about safety and sovereignty. The claim being pushed is that immigration enforcement, specifically ICE, is creating fear in communities and somehow making it harder for law enforcement to do their jobs. Now let's pause right there. Since when did enforcing the law become the problem? Since when did targeting illegal activity become something we have to apologize for? What we're hearing in this exchange is the idea that going after individuals in the country illegally might terrorize communities or discourage cooperation with police. And yes, the sheriff acknowledges that concern, saying that communities may be afraid to reach out. But here's the reality that needs to be said clearly. The job of law enforcement is not to make people comfortable with breaking the law. The job of law enforcement is to enforce the law fairly, consistently, and without exception. When we start shifting focus away from that, when we start worrying more about perception than about justice, that's when systems begin to fail. Now, to be fair, the sheriff also says something important. He believes in targeting individuals who commit crimes, whether documented or undocumented. That's a reasonable position on the surface. But here's the problem. If enforcement becomes selective, if we only act after crimes are committed, then we are always reacting instead of preventing. And that is not how you protect a nation. Another major point raised in this hearing is that some individuals detained in immigration operations reportedly had no serious criminal records. That's being used to argue that enforcement is too broad. But let's be honest. Being in the country illegally is already a violation of the law. That is the starting point. You cannot have a system where laws exist but are only enforced when convenient. That undermines the entire foundation of a legal system. Then the conversation moves into policy proposals. Things like requiring undocumented individuals to register, undergo background checks, and allowing them to work legally if they meet certain conditions. Now, on paper, that sounds like a structured approach. But here's the concern. If you don't first secure the border, if you don't enforce existing laws, then any system like that risks becoming an incentive rather than a solution. Because people around the world are watching. They're watching how seriously a country takes its own laws. And when they see inconsistency, when they see enforcement debated instead of applied, it sends a message. One of the most striking parts of this hearing is the framing. The idea that enforcement itself is somehow harmful, that it's targeting gardeners instead of gangsters, as one line suggested. That's a powerful phrase, but it oversimplifies a very complex issue. Because the truth is, you cannot always separate the two cleanly. You cannot build a system where laws are optional based on perception. Once you go down that road, you create loopholes, and those loopholes get exploited. And who pays the price? Law-abiding citizens. Communities don't become safer when laws are ignored. They become safer when laws are respected, enforced, and backed by leadership that refuses to compromise on security. Now, let's talk about something else that was brought up, fear. Yes, fear exists, but we need to ask the right question. What should people fear more? Law enforcement doing its job, or a system where laws are not enforced and accountability disappears? Because when criminals, real criminals, see a system that hesitates, that second-guesses itself, that worries more about optics than outcomes, they take advantage of that. That's not speculation. That's history. At the end of the day, what this hearing really shows is a deeper divide in how leaders view the role of government. One side sees enforcement as something to be balanced and softened. The other sees it as essential, non-negotiable, and foundational to national stability. And here on Freedom Forge, we're going to say it plainly. A country without consistent enforcement of its laws is not secure. It's not stable. And it's not fair to the citizens who follow those laws every single day. This isn't about being harsh. It's about being honest. If you want a system that works, it has to be respected. And if it's going to be respected, it has to be enforced. That's the bottom line. If you want more real breakdowns like this, where we cut through the talking points and get to what actually matters, make sure you like this video and subscribe to Freedom Forge. Because the truth doesn't defend itself. We have to stand up and speak it. And I'll see you in the next one.